So last week, my first week here, I guess second week, but my first sermon here, I talked about love and how I wanted love to be the foundation of this ministry. That no matter what programs, what visions we might have for this ministry, I wanted love to be the core, to be the foundation of this ministry. And today I kind of want to build upon that more on with this topic of love because when we think about it, love is what our foundation should be, but something that is even built on love, it takes courage for us to step forward. So I want to go kind of talk about what it means to step forward, and especially with myself in my past journey that to get here, but also for our EM who this ministry didn't have a pastor for a long time. For you guys to carry this journey out up to this point, I think it's important for us to remember the past so that we may be able to move forward. We are now stepping into this new, I want to call it a chapter for our EM ministry, hoping to start new things, hoping to move forward. And in order for us to move forward, like I said before, we have to really focus on what has happened to us before. Like, how did you, how did we, how did this EM, our Hyoshin EM, get here to this point? Nowadays, we don't do this, but you guys have all smartphones. Well, all of us have smartphones, right? No doubt. But do you remember the past times when we didn't really have smartphones, and back then all our photos were actual like pictures, right? We used to print them out and have like a family photo albums, right? Everyone's old enough to know those, right? Maybe some younger ones don't, but I yeah, I'm in that age gap too, where I'm used to those photo albums. And recently, when I was packing my stuff to move back to New York from Korea, I stumbled upon our old family albums. There were a lot. My parents used to love taking pictures, so we actually had like thick albums for each of my siblings and for my parents and a whole family album. So I took time to look through those, and I realized that a lot has happened, right? Those were great memories, but I realized I'm not only looking at pictures of myself when I was younger, when I was baby, but I'm also looking at the journey that I've taken to get to here right now. I'm, over 30 now, and from a baby to over 30, a lot has happened, right? A lot has happened, and I'm sure all of you guys can agree. From when you were kids to now, a lot has happened. um, it was interesting because the Family album, it kind of stopped right about the time when I was in like end of high school, and I realized that's because everyone, like literally everyone, had smartphones by the time I was like graduating or like freshman year in college. Everyone had smartphones, so we stopped taking family photos of the photo albums, and I moved out to the States when I was 10 from Korea. My family immigrated to California first, actually, when I was 10. And I'm sure all of you guys, most of you guys who, if you're the first generation or 1.5 generation like I am, can agree that life as an immigrant is tough. It's tough when you first move to a different country. I remember I was 10, so I didn't speak any English. The only English sentence that I knew how to say was, "Where's the bathroom?" That's the only thing I learned in school, and I got here, and it wasn't easy. I moved to the States when I was 10. I remember we didn't have a place to stay when our family first moved to to California. We didn't have a place to stay, so for months we've been house hopping from this 집사님's house for a few weeks to that 권사님's house for a month, for to this pastor's house for a few days. We've been just house hopping, and I also didn't see my dad. I only saw my dad once a week for a good amount of years when we first moved because he was always busy working in the morning. In the daytimes, he worked at a restaurant. In the night times, he was a taxi driver. And the only time that I would see him is on a Sunday when we go to church together, right? And those were the days actually for a few years, and years passed. We were finally able to get a house of our apartment of our own. We were finally able to eat dinner together regularly because my dad was able to find more stable job that paid the bills, right? And I remember thinking it was one dinner time when all of my family we were together. I remember thinking, yeah, we made it, right? In my head, I didn't tell my parents, but in my head, I'm just like, I was only like what, like 12 or something. I was like, we made it. We made it. We finally settled down in this new country. I don't even speak the language well, but I made it. We made it. And it wasn't anything special. I remember it was a small two-bedroom apartment for six of us. And it wasn't any fancy meal. We were having from what I remember, it was a Chinese takeout. But I remember thinking, wow, this is American life. This, like, we made it. Right. And also, I remember thanking God for the journey that I had only at 12 years old. I'm like, thank God. God, thank you for this house. Thank you for the food. Thank you that I get to eat dinner with my dad. I thank you. And I remember from that day on, continuously, my parents would constantly remind me that all that we have, all that our family have received, it's not our own will, our own power, but it is grace of God and His goodness. But as our life, our family's life situation's gotten better, as it has gotten better from a two-bedroom apartment to a three-bedroom, four-bedroom, even five-bedroom houses, um, and from like ordering Chinese takeout to going to a family restaurant, Korean barbecue restaurants, getting life better, I realized that gratitude towards God for all that He has done have what should have been in my heart has slowly moved to the back of my head. Do you guys get that? It was in my heart. It has been in my heart, and it slowly got moved back to the back of my head, and I realized that it was just out there, that I'm not thinking about it constantly. It's not that I forgot about it. It's not that I forgot the things that God has done for me in my life, but as it moved away to the back of my head, I am no longer actively thinking about it. I am no longer actively giving thanks. Take a moment to think about it for yourselves. I'm sure we can all agree that through the good days, the bad days, God has been faithful to each one of you and your family and your household, right? And guiding us. God has been guiding us. God has been leading us. But how often do we actively think about what God has done in our lives? How often do we actively give thanks to the things that God has done for our lives? In today's passage, God commands Joshua to choose 12 men, one from each tribe of Israel, to pick up a stone, each pick up a stone in the middle of the Jordan River and carry them over to Gilgal, which is their campsite for the night. But I want to kind of go over what happened before our passage today. For 40 years, you guys know the Israelites have been wandering off in the wilderness for 40 years. After they left Egypt under the leadership of Moses, they were wandering off in the wilderness to get to where? The promised land, where God has said, I will give you this promised land. But just like how they left Egypt and they had to cross the Red Sea, now they had to cross the Jordan River to get to that promised land. They had to cross the Jordan River to get to the promised land. And God, who's been faithful to the Israelites along all that 40 years of journey, once again splits the Jordan River for them to cross and get to this promised land. And after the crossing is our passage where God commands Joshua to pick 12 men, each of them pick up a stone and set it up in their camp base to set it as a memorial. So I want to kind of talk to you guys today. I want to go over what these stones means to the Israelites, but also to us, our Hyoshiniyam. First is the memorial for the past journey. First, obviously, this memorial, this monument, so to say, these stones, 12 stones, they served to remember the faithfulness that God has provided over the past 40 years. Right? It is for the Israelites to remember what God has done for 40 years. Right? I mean, for the Israelites were the people who have witnessed countless miracles in that wilderness, right? But God splits the Red Sea, provided manna and quail, led them with pillars of fire and cloud, dried rock turning into water, like springs of water at Horeb, bitter water turned into drinkable sweet water at Marah. Right? Battles after battles, they won because God has led them to victory. But these same Israelites who received and witnessed all these miracles were the same Israelites. When something was not right in their eyes, they're the ones who complained, my life was better in Egypt. They were the ones who always complained, my life was better in Egypt. Is that true? Were their lives actually better in Egypt? I don't think so, because they were slaves. And it says in Exodus chapter 1, it says that day the Egyptians made their lives, the Israelites' lives, bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. So their lives weren't better. They were slaves working every day ruthlessly, right? Their lives were filled with harsh labors and they were treated ruthlessly. But why did the Israelites complain that their lives were better in Egypt? It's just a pre-warning. I went to Korea to serve in the military, and uh, they say this in Korea where people don't like to hear your military story because it's boring to them. But for me, it's very fun, and it's only been a little over a year since I got off from the service. So I am gonna use military examples a lot. Maybe in the beginning. Maybe in the beginning. So when I served in the military, our meals were provided in those the Koreans call it shikpan, the metal tray, food tray, right? And after we finish eating, each one of us individuals we have to wash them ourselves and we put them in the drying rack. Um, but it's just bunch of boys, right? Like early 20s. So we like to have fun with everything that we do. So what we do is after we finish eating, we pile up the plates, the dishes, the trays, and about like 5, 10 people gather and we do rock, paper, scissors. And the loser has to wash all the plates. Right, the loser has to wash all the plates, and that's what our way of fooling around. That's our way of making things fun when military life doesn't it's not that fun, right? So that's our way of enjoying ourselves on that time. And so we do it every time, every 3 times a day, every time. But there's always those few people who refuse to join in the fun. There's always those too few people that says, I don't want to do it. I'm fine. And they just go and watch their own. So I asked them, like, hey, why don't you want to like join in, get with the program, like, kind of interact. And their reason is this, that they would rather wash one dish every time than having the possibility of having to wash like 10 dishes, like 15 dishes. Right. So for them, being predictable gave them much better comfort than being unpredictable. Right? It was comforting to know that I only have to do one than the possibility of having to do 10. For the Israelites, same. Although their lives were consisted of ruthless labor, they knew what to expect. They knew the next day I have to get up in the same time in the morning, work the same labor that I've done so in the past, get ruthlessly like treated the same way, but at least I know what I'm dealing with. But in the wilderness, their life was very different. They didn't know what to expect the next day. Yeah, they know the pillars are leading them and guiding them. They know where they're going, the promised land, but they don't know how long that will take. They don't know what the next day brings. If there's uncertainty in the wilderness. But now, after 40 years in the wilderness, they crossed the Jordan River and finally set their foot in the promised land. And in this exact moment, God commands them to set up stones of memorial, set up this monument to remember. Because this memorial was to be the symbol of God's faithfulness throughout the journey in the wilderness. And this memorial was to help the Israelites remember that although their lives in the wilderness may have been unpredictable, it was life filled with uncertainties, but in reality, God has been faithful, providing all the necessities through miracles after miracles. This memorial meant that God's provision of their past journey. And now I want to move into this second point, which is when we think about that as memorial, we can easily think, okay, this is God wanting the Israelites to remember the past 40 years, right? For the past 40 years, God can be like, hey, I showed you many miracles. Remember that. Look, when you look at the stones, remember this. But when we think that way, we can easily miss something, which is the second part that I want to share, which is memorial for the future ahead. So first was a memorial for the past journey, but now this memorial stands for the future ahead. If the stones were only about the past, I feel like God could have just said, "Hey, remember it. Remember what I've done for you in the past." And that's it. But instead, he commands them to build up a memorial, a physical memorial that they can see with their own eyes, because memorial isn't just for looking back, but it's something that points us forward. When we look at verses 6 and 7 again, we know exactly what these stones were meant for. It was meant more than the past. It was actually meant for the future. I'll read this to you. In verse 6, it says, to serve as a sign among you that in the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters from the Jordan were cut off, and the stones are to be memorial to the people of Israel forever. So look, in verse 6, it says, in the future. And then moves down to verse 7. It says, these stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. Not just at that time, but forever. The word memorial, when you look at it in original Greek word, it's zikaron. I have a slide up there. The word is called zikaron, which means memorial. But this word, it's not a passive word. It's actually an active word. It's not something that you hinder upon the past about. It's an active, ongoing word, which means that the purpose of the stones are to serve as a sign moving on from this point on as we head into the future, as the Israelites move on to whatever that's after them, whatever that's after crossing the river. God's not commanding them to just look back, think about it. Remember the past, reminisce. You remember the good old days where I gave you all these things, free food, free navigation. It's God's not saying that. God's saying, because I've been providing this for you, there's this memorial that will guide you forward. Because again, where are the Israelites at this point? If you guys think about the position that the Israelites are in right now, they've just finished crossing the Jordan River, right? Which means that they've finally arrived at the promised land. You got to think about this. For 40 years, they traveled for one reason, to get to that promised land. And after 40 years, they finally reached the promised land that they so long waited. Like, imagine how the Israelites felt. Imagine how they felt. I've been wanting to come back to the States, and I was in Korea for a little over 3 years. When I got here, I was very excited. But it's only been 3 years. Before the Israelites, it's been 40 years. They've been wandering off in the wilderness, and finally they got to the promised land. But this journey is not finished. It's not done yet. Because when you look at Exodus chapter 6, verse 8, this is God telling Moses. God says to Moses, I will bring you the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I'll give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. So God's not saying, hey, I'll let the Israelites, I'll let you, and I'll let your descendants just get to the promised land. No, whole purpose, the promise that God had was not for them to just get there, but to possess the land. Right, to possess the land. God's plan did not stop of them just getting there, but for them to possess that promised land. But here's the problem. Just when the Israelites got through the Jordan River and they got to there, what they saw right in front of them was the walls of Jericho. It was the walls of Jericho. Just when they thought, okay, we made it, there was walls of Jericho. The walls of Jericho was considered impenetrable. Right, there were these double-tiered mud bricks. Right, they were considered unbreachable, especially to the people like the Israelites. Because who were the Israelites? They were nomads, right? For 40 years, they've been wandering in the wilderness. They're nomads, with not really properly skilled armies, right? There were no like trained armies really. They didn't have obviously heavy weaponaries, missionaries to break down these walls, right? But instead, God says, I'll give you something to break down these walls. And what God gives is this memorial. We expect God to give like heavy weapons to break down these walls, but God says, this is what I'll give you, the memorial. Let's think about that. It wasn't the end for the Israelites. They didn't pass the promised land yet. There still was wall of Jericho in front of them, right? But God says, I'm going to break down those walls through these stones. It's kind of weird, right? It's not when you think about it. And if you know the whole story after the walls of Jericho, it crumbles down, and Israelites are to overtake this land, this promised land. But I think of it as very weird because if I was God, if I was someone that is leading my people to somewhere, if I had a promise to a certain person, I want the memorial to be built after the promise had been fully fulfilled. So technically, if I was God, If when the Israelites overcame and conquered the promised land, possessed the promised land, that's when I would tell them, okay, build that memorial so that you remember what to do, so that you remember what I did in the past for you. But no, but God says it. God says, build up this memorial, not after they conquer the land, but before, when they're facing the wall. This is something that we need to think about, because what the Israelites saw in front of them through the walls of Jericho was fear. It was intimidation, right? It was warring. Okay, God said, get here, but God said, possess this land, but there's this wall and there's an army in front of us that's willing to kill us because we're trying to take their land. There's this fear and intimidation, the reality of the great wall stopping them from possessing the promised land. But when they looked back, what they saw in the front was the wall, but when they looked back, there was the Jordan River and the memorial, the stones of memorial. In front of them was the wall, behind them was the river that they just crossed and the memorial stone. Ultimately, what God wanted to put in their Israelites' mind is that, yeah, I've carried you over for 40 years to get to this place, but it is not finished. Look, there's a wall in front of you that's blocking you, that's making you fear, there's intimidating you. But look who's behind your back. The wall, the stones of memory that has been with you and that will continue to guide you, help you overcome your fears, overcome your intimidations, overcome all that, so that you finally will get to the promised land that I've promised you, so that my promise will be fulfilled. So look back and go forward. That's what God is telling us. That's what God's telling the Israelites. They weren't pretending that the walls weren't there. They see it with their own physical eyes. It's not ignoring what's in front of you, but it's trusting who's behind you. It's choosing to let what God has already done for you shape how you face your fears and your intimidations that are in front of you. You know, as I close, I want to leave you with this. These the walls didn't move, it didn't crumble down because of the stone itself. Right? This stone did nothing physically to break down these walls. Right? It was just stones of memorial. It was just set there. It didn't like fly out and destroy the wall. It was just there. But the stones gave them something to stand on while they faced the wall. Going back to my old family album story, I guess, that family album was my stones of memorial for me. It was, as I looked through those photos, I didn't just see my old self, but I saw the journey that took me here. And I saw how faithful God has been for me and my family. Also, how far He has actually carried me. Because, I say this to you now, getting here to this point, it wasn't easy. I thought it was going to be easy when I first moved back to Korea. I thought I could come back, easily, but it wasn't easy for me, right? Some of you might know I had all the right reasons for my visa to be rejected. I'm not an ordained pastor yet. I lived in the States for so long, and it's so hard for them to give you a visa once you have that long period history of living in the States. Right? There were all these reasons that should have blocked me from getting, but the faithfulness that carried me through up to this point has continued to and has allowed me to be back here. And I believe that the same faithfulness that got me, a 10-year-old boy, right, through those uncertain times, is the same faithfulness that brought me here to New York to stand in front of you today, being able to share this message. And I want to encourage each one of you that I've gathered here today to, if you have not done so already, set up that memorial stone, stones of memorial, set up the monument, because we still have long journey ahead in front of us, right? We still have a long journey that's in front of us. And sometimes we might face fear, sometimes we might face intimidations. We don't know where to go, we don't know how to get to that other side. But remember, when you look back to the past, and remember when you look back to the monuments, you can probably say, okay, yeah, God has led me up to this point, and God will continue to lead me as I move forward. And also because it says to share it to your kids. When your children ask you, how'd you get here? I know some of you don't, or, even myself, we don't have children yet. But when your children says, how did you get here? When your friends say, how did you get here? When the people around you say, how did you get here? We can proudly say that it was all from God, because I have this monument in my heart right behind me. I can proudly say that how I got here and how I continue to move forward is because God has led me here, and that God will continue to be with me as I move forward. His faithfulness, his goodness has got us here, and his faithfulness is going to carry us forward. And I think that's really important for us to know as we start this new chapter for this ministry. In the last week I said we have all these plans. We want to do all these new programs. We have new visions for this ministry. And I said, let love be the foundation. But I also want to say, yes, let love be the foundation, but let God and his past faithfulness be the ones that are able to move us forward as we go along.